Have you ever noticed how the moment you stop chasing, stop over explaining, or stop giving all your energy away, she suddenly starts to notice the little things again? The moments you were there, but she took for granted, the patience you showed, the respect you silently commanded, all of it comes flooding back. Silence isn't emptiness, it's a mirror, a test, and a tool all at once. When you pull back, it's not about playing games. It's about regaining your power, letting her reflect, and watching her memories remind her what she truly had in you. There is a subtle power in silence that most people fail to understand, and it is often underestimated in the dynamics of attraction and relationships. When you choose not to speak, not because you are angry or indifferent, but because you are aware of your own value, your silence becomes a statement far louder than any words you could utter. Words can be cheap, they can be misinterpreted, dismissed, or forgotten, but silence carries weight. It carries authority. It carries the quiet confidence of a man who knows that his presence alone is enough to make her reflect, to make her think, to make her realize what she has taken for granted. There is a magnetic quality in someone who does not feel the need to justify themselves, who does not scramble for attention, who does not seek approval because it forces the other person to do the introspective work themselves. In that stillness, she begins to replay the moments you were patient, the gestures that went unnoticed, the sacrifices she assumed were effortless, and suddenly your value becomes undeniable without a single word being spoken. Silence is not emptiness. It is a language all its own, and when wielded with intention, it has the power to shift dynamics completely. In conversations, in arguments, in moments of tension, the instinct is always to fill the void with words, to explain, to persuade, to remind. But when you remain calm, collected, and quiet, you send a message that is impossible to ignore. You are secure in yourself, and you are not dependent on her reactions to define your self-worth. That quiet strength forces her to confront her own emotions, her own behaviors, and her own mistakes. She begins to notice the small things, the tone in your voice that is now absent, the eagerness that once seemed unlimited, the consistency she relied upon but never fully appreciated. Silence creates a space for reflection, and reflection is where clarity is born. It is in this space that she starts to remember the little details that made you special, the qualities she may have overlooked when you were constantly present and available. There is also a psychological pull in silence that triggers curiosity and attention. Humans are naturally drawn to what they cannot easily define or control. And when you stop responding, stop explaining, and stop chasing, you become the mystery she cannot solve. Her mind begins to replay conversations, replay moments, analyze your behavior, and question why you are not behaving like before. This mental replaying is where change happens. This is where the seeds of desire are sown. She starts to remember the depth of your care, the patience you exhibited, the emotional investment she underestimated. She begins to compare the emptiness of your absence with the fullness of your presence, and suddenly silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything she thought she had taken for granted. Silence also communicates confidence and control. It is a demonstration that you do not require constant validation, that your worth is inherent, and that your time and energy are precious. The more you understand this, the more you realize that words are not always necessary to be understood or respected. Your quietness becomes a magnetic force that draws her attention inward, compelling her to evaluate her own feelings, her priorities, and the way she treats someone who values themselves enough not to compromise their peace for momentary approval. Memory is a powerful force in human emotion and in relationships. It often acts as the quiet catalyst for desire. When you choose to step back, to pull away slightly, or to become intentionally silent. It is not absence that hurts. It is the recollection of your presence, of your energy, of the moments that once seemed ordinary but were quietly extraordinary. She begins to replay in her mind the late night conversations where you listened more than you spoke, the way your attention made her feel seen in a world where most people pass by without noticing, the gestures of care she may have dismissed because they appeared effortless. These memories have a way of resurfacing when there is space, when she is forced to confront the void left by your silence. And in that reflection, desire quietly reignites. She remembers the way you made her feel important without demanding recognition, the subtle ways you elevated her mood without needing applause, and suddenly the reality of your worth becomes undeniable. And desire is born from the recognition of what she almost lost. Desire is not always immediate. It is rarely about the present moment alone. It often arises from reflection, from looking back at what once existed and realizing the depth of its value. When you are silent, you are allowing her mind to wander through the corridors of her memories, to replay the moments she cannot replicate with anyone else, to remember the energy you brought into her life that was unique and irreplaceable. The longer she dwells on these memories, the more she feels the pull of your absence. And it is in that pull that desire grows, not as a fleeting impulse, but as a deep recognition of your impact. This awakening is subtle yet profound. It does not need reminders, it does not need explanations, because memory itself becomes the messenger, reminding her of the patience you displayed, the consistency you maintained, and the silent respect you commanded. Memory also highlights contrast, and contrast is a powerful tool for awakening longing. When your presence was constant, she may have taken it for granted, believing that your care and attention were endless resources that did not require effort to maintain. But when you step back, when you create a space where she must reflect, she starts to notice the difference between your past attention and the current calm of your quiet. She remembers the moments that brought her comfort, the laughter that seemed effortless, the support she depended on without acknowledging it fully. The mind naturally elevates these memories, amplifying their significance, and in that amplification, desire begins to rise because she recognizes a scarcity that she did not feel when everything was freely available. Your silence, in this sense, becomes a reminder of the value she once overlooked, and desire grows because memory awakens the longing for what was once taken for granted. Desire fueled by memory is deeper than mere attraction. It is rooted in recognition, respect, and emotional reflection. She does not merely want what you offer physically or superficially. She wants the energy, the stability, the emotional intelligence, and the consistency that she remembers vividly and cannot easily replace. The more she reflects, the more the desire becomes intertwined with understanding, and this type of desire is lasting, compelling her to reevaluate her actions, her priorities, and her willingness to match the energy she once benefited from effortlessly. Space is one of the most underestimated forces in relationships, yet it is perhaps the most powerful tool to awaken appreciation and awareness. When you create distance, not as a punishment, not as a game, but as a conscious act of self-respect, you are allowing her to experience life without your constant presence, without your energy being available on demand. And this absence naturally forces her mind and emotions to shift. People often fail to realize that constant proximity can dull awareness. When someone is always there, their value becomes normalized, and what was once cherished can slowly be taken for granted. But when space is introduced, It highlights the contrast between presence and absence, and suddenly the nuances of what you bring to her life, the respect, the emotional stability, the understanding, the patience, become illuminated in ways that words alone could never achieve. Space creates a vacuum that her mind naturally fills with reflection, replaying memories, noticing behaviors she overlooked, and realizing that the calm, steady energy you provided was not just comforting, but invaluable. Creating space is not about detachment for its own sake. It is about emotional intelligence and strategic presence. It is about knowing your worth and refusing to deplete yourself for validation or constant acknowledgement. When you step back, she starts to notice the patterns she previously ignored, the consistency in your attention, the subtle ways you made her feel safe, the energy you invested without asking for anything in return. This recognition does not happen instantly, but it builds steadily, quietly, like the slow but undeniable rising of the tide. Each day that passes without your habitual involvement is a day she is confronted with the reality of her dependence on you for emotional resonance. And this realization awakens a deeper sense of appreciation than any conversation or argument could provoke. Space teaches lessons that words cannot. It allows her to understand the effort, patience, and energy she once assumed were limitless. Space also amplifies curiosity and longing. When you are present all the time, predictability can dull the intrigue. But when you step back, a natural mystery emerges. She begins to ask herself questions. Why is he not reaching out like before? Why does he remain calm instead of reacting? What has changed? These questions compel her to reflect not only on your actions, but also on her own behavior and priorities. Appreciation grows when she realizes that the energy she once received effortlessly is now something she must consciously acknowledge, and the subtle shift of power and attention forces her to confront her true feelings. The quiet distance becomes a mirror that reflects her emotional investment, and in that reflection, she cannot deny the value you bring to her life. Finally, space allows her to feel the weight of absence in a way that presence never can. It teaches patience, reflection, and mindfulness, encouraging her to consider the moments, words, and energy she previously overlooked. Appreciation is rarely cultivated when everything is easily available. It is born from contrast, from the recognition of scarcity, and from the understanding that your presence was not merely a given, but a privilege. When you allow space to exist, you allow her to fully grasp your worth, your energy, and the role you play in her life. And that realization transforms the dynamic without a single word needing to be spoken. Emotional independence is one of the most misunderstood concepts in relationships, yet it is the single trait that demands respect effortlessly. When you are emotionally self sufficient, you do not rely on her validation, approval, or constant attention to feel whole. And this creates a magnetic energy that is impossible to ignore. Most people mistake independence for coldness or detachment, but true emotional independence is rooted in strength, clarity, and self awareness. It is the understanding that your value does not fluctuate based on her reactions or moods, that your peace is non negotiable, and that your time and energy are precious commodities reserved for those who genuinely respect and match your presence. When you embody this energy, it sends a quiet yet undeniable message. You are not here to be taken for granted, and anyone who wishes to share in your life must honor the space, the respect, and the stability you bring naturally. Emotional independence also shifts the dynamics of desire and attention. When you are overly available or constantly seeking approval, it diminishes the value of your energy because it becomes predictable and taken for granted. But when you establish boundaries, protect your emotional state, and refuse to sacrifice your well being for momentary validation, it forces her to reflect. She begins to notice the depth of your patience, the consistency of your support, and the calm confidence that you carry. And she is reminded that your energy is not limitless, it is selective, it is valuable, and it is earned. This is where respect begins to form. It is not demanded through words, ultimatums, or explanations, but naturally arises when she witnesses the strength and composure that emotional independence produces. It becomes clear that you are not someone who will bend, break, or compromise your self respect for convenience or attention. And this realization quietly elevates your presence in her mind and heart. Independence also fosters a sense of intrigue and curiosity. People are naturally drawn to those who are emotionally whole because they are unpredictable in the most compelling way. They cannot be controlled, persuaded, or manipulated easily. Your silence, your calm, and your refusal to react impulsively creates a space where she begins to question her own priorities, her own investment, and her own appreciation for what she has. Emotional independence commands her attention without effort because it reflects a life that is lived fully on its own terms, a life that is not dependent on approval, but is generous when shared with someone worthy of that energy. The stronger your internal compass, the more she is compelled to acknowledge the weight of your presence and the rarity of your emotional stability, and the more she begins to match the energy you naturally provide. Finally, emotional independence teaches a subtle but profound lesson about boundaries and self respect. When you do not allow your emotional state to be dictated by external forces, she is forced to see the reality of your value, the patience, the understanding, the consistency, and the energy that you bring without expectation. It commands respect because it shows that you are not a product of manipulation or circumstance, but a person of integrity, discipline, and unwavering self awareness. The more she witnesses your composure and quiet confidence, the more she is drawn to align with it, and the more she realizes that emotional independence is not just an attribute, but a force that transforms relationships, dynamics, and perception. Detachment is one of the most revealing forces in a relationship, and it exposes truths that words and gestures alone can never fully uncover. When you step back emotionally, when you allow space between you and her without resentment or anxiety, you are creating a mirror that reflects her true intentions, her priorities, and her level of emotional investment. Most people mistake detachment for disinterest, but it is far from that. It is a demonstration of self-worth, self-control, and clarity. It signals that you are not dependent on her approval or validation to maintain your peace. And in that quiet, subtle shift, the mask of convenience and habit falls away. She begins to reveal herself not in what she says, but in how she chooses to respond to your absence, to your calm, and to the lack of constant attention that once fueled her security. Detachment exposes the reality of her desires, showing whether she values you for your energy and presence, or whether she only engages when it suits her mood, convenience, or selfish interests. Detachment is also a test of commitment. When you remain unattached to outcomes, when your focus is on your own life, growth, and emotional stability rather than on controlling her reactions, you allow her to rise to the occasion if her intentions are genuine. Her actions become the measure of her priorities, her willingness to invest, and her understanding of your worth. Some people will shrink in the face of detachment because it forces them to confront the truth of their investment, the absence of control, and the scarcity of your energy. Others will step up, match your presence with genuine effort, and demonstrate that they are capable of valuing someone who does not chase them blindly. Detachment in this sense is not cruelty or punishment. It is a natural filter that separates those who are opportunistic from those who are sincere, those who are reactive from those who are committed, and those who see your energy as a privilege rather than a given. There is also a psychological impact in detachment that cannot be overstated. Humans are wired to notice absence and scarcity, and when you pull back, you activate a process of reflection and self evaluation in her mind. She begins to ask herself questions. Do I truly value him? Am I willing to meet his energy? Did I take his presence for granted? This self interrogation forces awareness, and awareness leads to either action or revelation. Detachment tests her patience, her intentions, and her priorities without you needing to say a single word, and in the space you create, clarity emerges. It becomes apparent who is capable of understanding the depth of what you bring to a relationship and who only engages superficially. And this clarity is invaluable because it spares you from unnecessary confusion, emotional drain, and unreciprocated effort. Finally, detachment highlights the balance of power and respect. When you are emotionally self sufficient and allow space in a relationship, you are asserting a quiet authority, one that cannot be challenged through manipulation, neediness, or impulsive reactions. It draws out authenticity because only those with genuine intentions will rise to meet your energy, and the rest will fade into the background. Detachment, in essence, becomes a tool of revelation, a measure of truth, and a demonstration that relationships thrive not on control or dependency, but on mutual recognition, respect, and conscious effort. Energy is far more powerful than words because it communicates authenticity, intent, and presence in ways language cannot. Words can be misunderstood, ignored, or dismissed, but the energy you emit is undeniable, magnetic, and unforgettable. When you step into a space with confidence, composure, and emotional clarity, your energy alone conveys your value, your boundaries, and your self respect. She feels it before she understands it. She notices it before she consciously acknowledges it. This is the quiet force that shapes attraction, influences perception, and commands attention without explanation. Energy over words is not about being aloof or cold. It is about understanding that your vibration, your presence, and the way you carry yourself communicate far more than you could ever articulate. People may not always remember the specific things you said, but they will remember the way your presence made them feel, the calm authority you projected, and the invisible respect you commanded through your actions, demeanor, and the subtle way you guard your energy. When you rely on words to prove your worth, to justify your actions, or to elicit responses, you give away your power. Words require validation. They can be challenged, debated, or forgotten, but energy is irrefutable. It cannot be bargained with or dismissed because it emanates from a place of internal alignment. When you are emotionally grounded, self aware, and detached from the need for external approval, your energy naturally shifts dynamics. She begins to notice nuances, the way you remain calm under pressure, the patience you exhibit without needing acknowledgement, the quiet confidence that demands respect. Energy communicates standards without declarations and boundaries without confrontation. It creates an invisible framework of expectation that cannot be ignored. And in that framework, she is drawn to reflect on her behavior, her priorities, and the depth of your presence in her life. Energy also transcends the limitations of conversation because it influences perception subconsciously. People often underestimate the psychological weight of consistent energy, the way your emotional stability, your composure, and your self possession shape the environment around you. She absorbs it even when you are silent. She notices it in moments of tension or calm, and she begins to align her thoughts and actions with the energy you naturally project. Energy acts as a mirror, reflecting her own level of respect, attention, and emotional investment. It draws her in not through persuasion, but through subtle influence, creating desire, curiosity, and awareness in ways words could never achieve. The more you cultivate a presence that is self contained, grounded, and consistent, the more she internalizes your value and the more she begins to recognize the uniqueness of what you bring to her life. Ultimately, energy over words is a declaration of self worth, emotional mastery, and intentional presence. It is the silent force that reveals character, evokes reflection, and commands respect. While words can fade, be misunderstood, or manipulated, energy remains constant, undeniable, and transformative. It shifts dynamics without confrontation, elevates perception without explanation, and creates attraction that is deep, lasting, and rooted in authenticity rather than superficial gestures. When you understand the power of your energy, you realize that presence is more influential than speech, that silent confidence outweighs verbal persuasion, and that the force you radiate will always leave a stronger imprint than any words could convey. When you choose silence, when you step back, when you allow space and detach without desperation, you are not being distant. You are commanding presence, respect, and awareness in ways words could never achieve. Silence speaks louder than any explanation, allowing her to reflect on the moments, gestures, and energy she once overlooked. And memory awakens desire as she reconnects with the parts of you that were quietly extraordinary. Space creates appreciation by highlighting what she took for granted, showing her the value of your time, energy, and presence. And emotional independence commands respect because it demonstrates that your peace, your worth, and your energy are non negotiable. Detachment tests true intentions, revealing who is willing to rise, who genuinely values you, and who only engages when convenient. And energy over words communicates your essence, your confidence, and your standards in ways that no conversation could replicate. The combination of these truths forms a powerful dynamic where presence is felt, value is recognized, and desire is awakened. And the one who truly understands your worth will not only notice, but be drawn to match the energy, respect the space, and honor the quiet strength that you embody in every interaction.